If I could bring one dead philosopher back to life, it'd be Immanuel Kant. Not because I agree with everything he says or because I think he'd be cool to grab a beer with, but because in just my opinion, he's one of the smartest philosophers. He pretty much touched on every branch of philosophy and interconnected them in his own way. Metaphysics, epistemology, ethics. Kant did groundbreaking work in each of these fields. Even though we're going to try to focus on his ethics, we'll see how these fields also become relevant. The starting point for Kant's moral philosophy is found in his work, The Grounding for the Metaphysics of Morals, also sometimes called the Groundwork for the Metaphysics of Morals. But make no mistake, this is a grounding for something further. This one book does not fully encapsulate all of Kant's thoughts on the matter. In fact, he has another book entitled The Metaphysics of Morals. It's just hard to find because whenever you Google that, you're probably going to get hit with a much more popular grounding book. Kinda like when you were a kid searching up Halo 3 but you only got results for the Beyonce song. Point is, if you think something feels missing or left out in this small book, maybe the Metaphysics of Morals can fill in that gap for you. And this video is meant as just an introduction, because if you've read Kant, you know, this guy's writing is dense. So we'll have to break this up into multiple videos. Now I gotta warn you, this first part of this video is heavily based on epistemology, or the study of knowledge. It's pretty abstract and will certainly turn many of you away, so be warned. It is only for those brave souls who could get through epistemology. But after that, we'll go into an actual real-life example of Kant's moral philosophy involving the issue of lying. So what is a metaphysics of morals anyway? Let's actually define the title of the book we're working with so we know what it's all about. Let's start with metaphysics. Metaphysics for Kant are a philosophy that is based on a priori principles. Now that's a big Kant term that basically means prior to experience. So these are principles you can deduce solely from using your rational mind. You don't need experience to come up with these principles. For example, if it is Monday, then it is not Saturday. You don't need to check anything out in the world to know that this statement is true. You can simply deduce in your mind that if it is Monday, then it is therefore not Saturday. Principles like these build up metaphysics for Kant. All philosophy, insofar as it is founded on experience, may be called empirical, while that which sets forth its doctrines as founded entirely on a priori principles may be called pure. The latter, when merely formal, is called logic, but when limited to determinate objects of the understanding, it is called metaphysics. So when we're talking about a metaphysics of morals, we're talking about something that is based in the a priori reasoning. It's not dependent upon experience or what's out there in the world. It's based upon rational deductions. Now you might think this is dumb because why wouldn't you want to base your ethics on, what's actually happening out there in the world? I mean, come on, Kant. Shouldn't we experience things and base our reasoning upon that? Well, no. In fact, for Kant, it's a good thing to purge his metaphysics of morals of any experience or context dependency, or anything like that. Experience may corrupt what Kant is trying to create here, which is a pure morality, which can guide us universally. It's like Kant is trying to create a perfect blue paint, and any addition of empiricism is like dropping a dot of red paint in there to mess him up. A metaphysics of morals is thus indispensably necessary, not merely because of motives of speculation regarding the source of practical principles which are present a priori in our reasoning, but because morals themselves are liable to all kinds of corruption, as long as the guide and supreme norm for correctly estimating them are missing. Look, throughout the world, different cultures have different moral beliefs, and throughout time, our moral beliefs change as well. If Kant wrote about morality based solely on his experiential time and place, we arguably would not be talking about it today. He was after something that would survive change, something universal, something eternal, something that we could always rely on no matter where we are and what time we were living in. I know epistemology or knowledge talk isn't really what this channel is about, and it may be boring to some of you, but it's really foundational for Kant's moral philosophy. But here's the bad news, guys. We only just covered the preface of this book, the grounding for the grounding, so to speak. So let's stop playing in the ground for now and actually shift on over to another work by Kant entitled On a Supposed Right to Lie Because of Philanthropic Concerns. We're going to jump from the preface to an actual application by Kant to see where his concern for universality comes into play in an example. So this essay is responding to a complicated situation involving a murderer. Let's say you're at home one night eating Panda Express when your friend knocks at your door. He says, "Hey friend, you gotta hide me in your house. A murderer is stalking me and is trying to kill me." Now since you're a good friend, you let them hide upstairs. Minutes later you hear a knock on the door, and when you open it, you see an axe-wielding man asking about the whereabouts of your friend. Should you tell him the truth that you let him hide upstairs? Or should you lie and say he's elsewhere? So we'll get into Kant's categorical imperative in another video, but for now just go with Kant thinks that you should never lie, and this should be a universal rule for you to follow. But wait, if you should never lie, then you can't lie in this example. Therefore you should tell the murderer that you let your friend hide upstairs? That sounds a bit weird, Kant. How do you justify this? First, Kant reminds us that outside this specific situation, lying is wrong. We should tell the truth even if it means harm. Truthfulness in statements that cannot be avoided is the formal duty of man to everyone, however great the disadvantage that may arise therefrom for him or for any other. We usually think about telling the truth as being good even when it disadvantages us. You know, like when we were kids and we stole something, telling the truth may mean we get put in timeout, but it's still considered the right thing to do. Okay, Kant, but you can't escape the situation any longer. Are you really saying that we should tell the murderer that we hid our friend upstairs? Well, yes, for two big reasons. The most appealing is the detachment from our actions to the effect. You telling the truth is not you picking up the axe and murdering your friend. Your action is simply telling the truth. Yes, it's very probable that this will lead to your friend being brutally murdered, but it's not the actual cause of telling the truth. Because what if your friend escaped through the window? What if your friend did that, you lied and said he wasn't there, and then the murderer finds your friend outside and murders him? Then your lie would have caused his death. You see, the effects of our actions aren't always certain. They're based on experience in the material world and are therefore volatile and subject to change. That's why Kant is so vehement about universality, because it's like a guiding light that will tell us what to do in any situation. So it's not you telling the truth that gets your friend killed, it's the one actually doing the killing. You telling the truth is just you doing your duty. Another important concept we'll cover in another video. It was merely an accident that the truth of the statement did harm to the occupant of the house. For every man has not only a right, but even the strictest duty to be truthful in statements that are unavoidable, whether this truthfulness does harm to himself or others. But Kant, can't we let it slide just this once? I mean, come on, this is a pretty unique situation here. Well, no, because allowing any exceptions or context-dependent actions would go against the very concept of universality, the very big thing Kant is after. If we really want the idea that lying is wrong to be applied throughout space and time eternally, then we have to abide by it in every instance, even when it accidentally leads to harm to others. Section 1 of the groundwork for the Metaphysics of Morals is a little more down to earth. He starts by asking, what can we consider to be good in itself? Or rather, what is good without any other qualification? Think about something like intelligence. We all think of intelligence as a good thing, right? But is intelligence good in itself? What if you had an evil genius trying to formulate a plan for world domination? Would you want him to have intelligence? Alright, so maybe intelligence isn't good in itself. What about courage? Courage is good, right? I mean, that's a virtue shared by both Aristotle and the Stoic philosophers. Well, would you really want courage in the hands of a would-be serial killer, on the verge of going on some spree but just needs a little bit more courage to go through with it? Of course not. So again, like intelligence, courage in the hands of someone with an evil will or intent becomes bad. But wait a minute, if a bad or evil will makes one of these virtues bad, then what about a good will? Is a good will something that is good in itself without any other qualifications? For Kant, yes. I mean, it's impossible to do bad if your will is good. I like to think of a will as a drive, you know, what drives you, what motivates you? What are your intentions that will lead to actions? If your will is good, then the root of all your actions will be good, and it'll be impossible to do bad. But it's not so much the effects of the good will that make it good. For Kant, the good will is good in itself. A good will is good not because of what it affects or accomplishes, nor because of its fitness to attain some proposed end. It is good only through its willing, i.e., it is good in itself. Now, how do we find this good will? How do we know if we have a good will? Kant says the good will can be highlighted by examining the concept of duty. Therefore, we shall take up the concept of duty, which includes that of a good will, though with certain subjective restrictions and hindrances, which far from hiding a good will or rendering it unrecognizable, rather bring it out by contrast and make it shine forth more brightly. I know when we think of duty, we usually think of some drill sergeant or authority figure yelling at us to do something that we really don't want to do, but we have to do it anyway. But let's really dive into what Kant means by duty, because after all, if we understand what duty is, we might be able to recognize if we do actions out of duty, and that could help us possibly recognize our own goodwill. Let's first understand what Kant doesn't mean by duty. Firstly, doing something for some other end than a duty is not doing something out of respect for that rule. For example, let's say you see a wallet on a table and the owner is looking away. You could steal it, which goes against the duty of not stealing, which would obviously not be abiding by that duty. But if you refuse to steal it because you're afraid of being caught, then that's also not acting in accordance with that duty, because you decided not to steal it out of fear for repercussions, not out of respect for the duty of not stealing. If, however, you see the wallet, but solely out of respect for the duty of not stealing, you refuse to steal, then you'd be doing your duty, and that could highlight a goodwill in this case. Moral worth for Kant only comes when you do a good deed solely out of respect for that duty, and no other external motivations. This makes one intent very important to Kant, rather than the results of an action which we might find in utilitarianism or other consequentialist philosophies. The good found in an action is not so much its intended effects, but the duty to the rule or maxim. An action done from duty has its moral worth, not in the purpose that is to be attained by it, but in the maxim according to which the action is determined. I think it's time for an example to tie this all together. This channel's name combines my two loves, philosophy and comics, so this example is taken from the latter. Let's say we have a surgeon, and this surgeon saves a young boy's life who got shot in the head. He does this because it's his duty as a surgeon to save lives. Unbeknownst to him, the boy grows up to be a serial killer and murders multiple people. Now someone might say the surgeon was in the wrong for saving the boy, because he, in effect, saved someone who led to the deaths of multiple people, therefore causing the deaths of those people. But no, Kant would say that the surgeon doing his duty of saving his life would still have moral worth. Even if, down the line, the serial killer gets shot and is again in critical condition, the surgeon would be doing the moral thing of yet again saving his life, even with the knowledge that the patient is a serial killer. Because it's not the effect of our actions that determine their moral worth. It's our duty to the moral rule, in this case saving a life. Now we've been talking about these moral rules like don't steal and save lives. But what exactly are these moral rules? Well, that's Kant's next mission, to think up some rule that can be considered good regardless of the effect and is good without qualification. This leads Kant to his first formulation of something called the categorical imperative. I should never act except in such a way that I could also will that my maxim should become a universal law. There's a lot of terminology in there, so let's break it down. Maxim essentially means rule or principle, and this maxim is brought about by an action. For example, if I tell a lie, then the maxim I'm pushing is that it's okay to lie. So Kant is saying that we should not act in a way that the rules or maxims of that action should become universally applied, or become a universal law. So again, same example. If I tell a lie, the maxim of that action is that lying is okay. Kant then wants us to consider whether we'd want that maxim to become universal in a way that everyone would follow it. In this example, that means, would I want to live in a world where everyone follows the rule that lying is okay? Would I want to live in a world where everyone lies? Of course not, therefore I shouldn't lie. One way to simplify the categorical imperative is to equate it to the golden rule of do unto others as you would have done to yourself. And while it's a good way to easily understand it, it's not the full picture. I'd say a more accurate simplification would be, do unto others as you would have done to yourself and everyone else in the world. Because a universal law doesn't mean you're the only one affected, but everyone else. So your friends and family, would you really want them to be lied to as well? One common criticism of Kant is how a masochist would apply the categorical imperative. The reasoning being that a masochist is fine with having pain inflicted upon himself, therefore he could inflict pain on others. But if we really take the rules universally and apply it to everyone, would the masochist be fine with having pain inflicted on his family, his friends, his other loved ones? So the next time you're about to do something morally questionable, Kant wants us to ask ourselves, would we really be okay if everyone else in the world did what we were doing? Going back to our surgeon example, we would want our surgeon to save lives, because we would hope that everyone else would follow the maxim of save lives in danger. Don't worry about context specifics and who the person in danger is or what effect it would have, because we want these rules to be applied universally. But let's finally look into what the categorical imperative is, its different formulations, and the debate surrounding it. In our last video, we came across our first formulation of this categorical imperative, and this is it right here. I should never act except in such a way that I could also will that my maxim should become a universal law. This is also called the universality formulation of the categorical imperative, which implies that there are other formulations of this thing. But let's examine these two words and see what they mean for Kant: categorical and imperative. Kant starts with the word imperative. Up to this point, Kant has been emphasizing the importance of duty in his moral philosophy. It's important we do a good thing not because of some ulterior motive, but simply out of respect for a rule. And we've also seen the importance of universality with Kant, desiring that these rules should be applicable throughout space and time. So he's already set us up to expect something necessary and required, and this plays into how he defines the word imperative. Imperatives are only formulas for expressing the relation of objective laws of willing in general to the subjective imperfection of the will of this or that rational being, e.g. the human will. So these imperatives are these formulas of command, these ought statements, that communicate to us in our human will. They tell us objective rules or principles through these you ought to statements. But we as humans ultimately have the power to reject or accept those imperatives. For example, if I came up to you and said, you ought not to lie, I would be giving you an imperative to not lie, because to Kant it is the objective rule. But again, the imperative can't force you to do anything even though it says that you must do something. That's where we get into categorical imperatives versus hypothetical imperatives. A hypothetical imperative says that something is good because of something else. For example, don't lie because you don't want to be called a liar. That's a hypothetical imperative. The goodness of an act is dependent upon something else other than the act. Now contrast this with the categorical imperative, which would say that you shouldn't lie simply because lying is wrong. A categorical imperative, which declares an action to be of itself objectively necessary without reference to any purpose, i.e. without any other end, holds as an apodictic practical principle. Also, no shame in not knowing what apodictic means because I didn't either. It just means necessarily true, which does fit for what Kant is after. So categorical means something is objectively and necessarily right, and imperatives are formulas for determining an action. Put those two together, and a categorical imperative is going to say that we need to do something not because of the effects of that action, but because the action in itself is objectively and necessarily good. Finally, there is one imperative which immediately commands a certain conduct without having as its condition any other purpose to be attained by it. This imperative is categorical. It is not concerned with the matter of the action and its intended result, but rather with the form of the action and the principle from which it follows. Now it's time to get really confusing, so take my hand as we venture into the gray world of whether there is one or many categorical imperatives. Kant seems to make it easy for us by essentially repeating the universality imperative as the one true imperative. Hence there is only one categorical imperative, and it is this: act only according to that maxim whereby you can at the same time will that it should become a universal law. Simple enough, right? Wrong. Later on, Kant goes on to say this: the practical imperative will therefore be the following: act in such a way that you treat humanity, whether in your own person or in the person of another, always at the same time as an end and never simply as a means. Okay, wait. This imperative is talking about treating others as ends and not simply as means. Is this a different categorical imperative? But Kant just told us that there is only one categorical imperative. So which is it? Apparently this has been a question that has riddled many philosophers, but not to worry because I have the objectively correct answer. Okay, probably not, but this is what I got. Kant says that there's only one categorical imperative, so let's take him for his word. But why is there a universality formula and now a means formula? Well, as the translator for my copy, James W. Ellington, writes, they are different formulations of one categorical imperative that imply each other. That's the easiest way to think about it for me, that they imply each other. If you acted only in a way that you'd want everyone else to be treated similarly, i.e. the universality formula, then it's implied that you're treating other people, heck, the entirety of humanity, as ends. So the universality formula implies the mean formula. But does the mean formula imply the universality formula? Well, if you're treating all of humanity as an end, then you're considering your actions and how they would be applied not just to the people involved, but the entirety of humanity. Thus, the means formula would in turn imply the universality formula. This is a lot, so let's continue to use the example of lying. Let's say you're considering lying to your friend that you'll pay him back if he gives you a copy of a comic you want. The universality formula would say that we should not lie because we would not like lying to become a universal law. This considers all the other humans in the world as an end. The means formula would say that we shouldn't lie because we shouldn't use our friends simply as a means to get a comic. But to not treat humans as a means would mean to consider them and their autonomy universally, thus implying the universality formula. It's confusing, and Kant himself is not much help, but bottom line is that there is one categorical imperative, but different formulations of it, with each saying things differently but implying the same thing. Now the hardest part about this for me to accept is that I was on board with the universality formula. I mean, totally. Let's consider our actions becoming universally applied. However, I wasn't entirely on board with the means formula, because we all treat each other as means in some way. Right now you're treating me as a means by watching this video, and the parts used to make the device you're watching this on, those parts were put together by others, who you're also treating as means. We treat people as means at work, when shopping, dining. I mean, it seems inescapable. That is, until I found the magic word in one of the means formulations. The one we already covered uses the word simply, but check this one out. Now I say that man, and in general every rational being, exists as an end in himself and not merely as a means to be arbitrarily used by this or that will. Did you catch that magic word? Merely. Look, it's impossible to not rely on the help of other people, and essentially use them as means, unless you're 100% self-sufficient and live off the land or something. But just because we're helping one another, doesn't mean that they're merely means or should be viewed as such. I think if we respect each other's autonomy and consider everyone universally when acting, i.e. the universality formulation, then we can treat people as both means and ends, not simply as means. Maybe I'm reading Kant wrong, but that's the best I could come up with to square away the means formulation and to make it work with the universality formulation, to essentially be one categorical imperative. Feel free to leave a comment below, and if you enjoyed this video then be sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell button for more. And with that, I wish you all a beautiful rest of your day.